Welcome back. We are on day 3 with our friend and colleague, Dr. Earl Henslin, and we've been talking about the brain and psychotherapy and how you have utilized putting images into your practice. One thing we didn't mention about you, Dr. Henslin, is that you're actually on the board for the foundation for End Mental Illness Now.
Yeah, and because when I went to that very first seminar with Dr. Amen, on my drive home, I called a friend of mine who's, he and his wife are very successful business people. And I said, you got to go see Dr. Amen, explain the SPECT scan and everything. And the next week, they literally made an appointment and flew up to see you. And for him, it was the first time in his life that he was free from intense anger and from migraines. He'd been to all the best medical facilities around the country and no one had been able to help. And so then he called me up. It was like a month or two later. He says, he was talking with his wife and he said, we want to help people who can't afford to get these scans. Still gets me. And over the next 10 years, they basically contributed over $1 million.
Wow.
And we were able to help people get scans that would never be able to afford it. Yeah. There were pastors, missionaries, secretaries at a business or janitor. And then there were people that were doing well, but the money was so tight they just couldn't get the scan. And it was so wonderful to know that scan would help him. And I would say, let me make a call. And I have a friend who just might say yes. I can't promise anything. And so literally ever since then, that couple, they've only said yes, and have continued to help people today. When I walked in the building today, there was a patient in the waiting room, that they sent the money for to get a scan.
Oh, that's so funny.
And so to me, if anyone out there, because I know there's people listening that do have the means, and even if you can just make a small donation, whatever that would be.
Or if you just know someone that needs help, even.
To donate the money for them to get the scan, because it's life-changing. Give you a quick example. A person on disability, from working in a software company at a job she was not suited for, in an abusive relationship, massively depressed. She came in with a medical file literally this thick. And she had massive panic attacks, couldn't get out of the house, and then plus incredible GI problems and so on. And so, and I was paid for this file, and she'd gone through every test, and MRIs, and labs, and everything. And I said, well, we need to get the scan. And she said, okay. So we got the donation and then sent her. And we got the brain balanced out for the very first time in her life. She went from being in an ER room on a quarterly basis for some reason, because her potassium and sodium had just suddenly dropped out. She couldn't eat. She was underweight. The anxiety was so intense. And so then as we got the brain balance out and the panic attacks down, then a flood of memories came back of being abused when she was a little girl. And only now we're able to work it through and have it be a healing experience. So within a 2.5-year period of time, she went out and started her own business and is making her way in the world today. Whereas before, she was being defined as permanently disabled for the rest of her life. Now there's no more workman's comp, and she's producing and happy, and her marriage made it through it, and they have a lovely marriage. Wow. And I literally could spend the entire day just telling story after story like that, because hopefully someone there will want to make that call or go online to make the donation to help another person, because she really is a gift of life. It's incredible.
I've had the same experience. I end up adopting people, sort of. I do this all the time. But there's only so many people
you call me up and say, you're going to adopt this person.
Well, but but you end up paying. I end up paying for it out of pocket, basically, and because there's so many people out there suffering, and so I'll be somewhere and I'll meet someone. I'll meet a veteran or someone who's just suffering horribly. And what are you going to? I feel terrible.
Right.
So I'll call them up and I'm like, I need to bring this person into the clinic. You know,
Right.
I mean, we're going to have to do this. You know, pay for it ourselves. But there's only so many people you can do that for.
Right.
So the foundation, that's the part of the foundation that really touches my heart, is when
Right.
we can help people that really need help. And so those are the people. I mean, we're just trying really hard to build that part of our foundation, to be able to
Exactly.
help more people, because families change.
Right.
Like we adopted another person. We adopted literally is my sister and my nieces, and we are completely literally changing the dynamics of that family,
Right.
which will now change the next generation.
Exactly.
And that's the point.
Exactly.
So, I mean, we're trying as hard as we can to do our part. But if there are people who can help other people, some people can't.
Right.
But some people can.
Exactly.
So one of your stories that I really like the most is about your mom.
Oh,
Can you talk about that and what it was like for her when she got her first scan?
yeah. My mom has had depression and problems with anger, and then more recently memory problems and migraines for over 50 years. And our farm in southern Minnesota is 15 miles away from the Mayo Clinic. And I have great uncles that actually worked with Charles and Will Mayo in the beginning. And so our family always had the best medical care, and yet no one looked at her brain. And so she never got the relief. She's on the typical meds for migraines and typically antidepressants, which now looking back actually made her worse. And so she was at probably the lowest point in her life, and severely depressed. And I had been trying for 10 years to get her to get a scan, and she kept saying no. And finally she said yes. And so she was after a Mother's Day weekend, and Monday morning we were we were in the lobby of the office, and I'm helping her fill out the forms. I said, Mom, have you ever had any head trauma? Because I can't remember an accident or you falling or slipping on the snow or the ice or anything. And she started to cry. And she said, well, I was 12 years old. I was swinging on a rope up in the barn, and the 2x4 holding it broke. And as she's falling, the board hit her in the back of the head. And her dad found her on the floor in a pool of blood.
Oh.
And that would have been 1944. And she had over 50 stitches to take care of the lacerations from that blow. So for me, what happened at that moment, just with her hitting her head there, I know there's going to be injury back here in the cerebellum and occipital lobes. It was going to bounce forward,
Right.
It'd be injury in the frontal cortex. And that's why growing up, she didn't think before she said or did things, you know. And then the brain bounces around, and I knew there'd be injury in the temporal lobes, and that would be, and with that anxiety center high, then I knew finally the source of the migraines and depression that no antidepressant could help. Because one of the things I learned that first seminar was that there are two systems of the brain that produce the same symptoms, but they require different strategies to help. And that's what gets confusing. Just a symptom of anxiety doesn't mean anything unless
Right.
you look at the brain and know where it comes from. So we're sitting in Dr. Amen's office, and he brings her brain up, and my heart just sinks, you know, because what I'm saying is not pretty. And so you said, you tell her. My mom said, I said, no, wait a minute. I'm like a patient here. This is my mom. You tell her. Because you know it was both of us. And so she says, one of you boys say something. And so then I said, well, Mom, you're headed for dementia. Because the longitudinal fissure goes right down the middle, looked like a Grand Canyon.
Oh, no.
And you could see the frontal lobes were atrophying and the temporal lobes. And my heart just sank. But I said, but Mom, you show no symptoms. So I looked at you and I said, so if we improve the perfusion or blood flow in the frontal cortex and the temporal lobes, you should be better. And I said, right, Dr. Amen? He nods and said yes. And so he put her on gabapentin medication. It hits that anxiety center, dials it down. And then supplements, brain and memory power boost, which was highly successful in the NFL football player study. And then I got her to start reading anything and everything that you write. So she keeps your stuff on her computer, and she knows nutrition backwards and forward. Plus, she began walking every day. Now, about 60 days later, I happened to get my dad on the phone. He was still alive then. And I said, Dad, what do you notice with Mom? And he said this. I gave her a birthday present, and she smiled, and she said, thank you. Because before that, like a spontaneous expression, this wasn't there. And then when I got a hold of Mom, I said, Mom, do you notice any changes between you and Dad? She says, I feel so sad for how hard I've been on him. I never had the ability to let things bounce off. That got me thinking about the role the brain plays in boundaries, because people can say hurtful things or do hurtful things. It's not good to overreact, not good to underreact. But calming down that basal ganglia, getting that frontal lobes working, actually gave her the ability to let something bounce off that would have made her angry before. Then what happened, all of a sudden, that's 13 years ago, and I was 54, I hate to admit. And I started to get used to having a mom.
Right.
Because then when I'd call, she'd say, how are you doing? And she just really wanted to know. And wanted to know what you could pray for and things like that. And then in the last 10 years of my dad's life, I watched them be affectionate to each other. So I saw love and I saw caring there that I hadn't seen growing up. And so, but the impact on that was across 4 generations. My granddaughter had me come and talk to her school about the brain. They got to the drug and alcohol part of their house book, and she said, let's ask my grandpa to come. He's famous, and he knows a lot about the brain. He'll show pictures. So I go and I show these kids pictures of 6th graders, and the stuff that came out of the woodwork was just amazing. Yeah. But I started to tell a story about the importance of exercise. And because my dad, when he was given 6 months to live, he went out and got a job as a security guard. I was trying to figure out why. It took me 2 months. And I said, Dad, did you do that because those doctors told you to walk, and the only way you're going to walk is if you get paid for it?
That was so funny.
And he said, yes. Well, Georgia raises her hand, my granddaughter, as I start to talk about exercise. And she says, I said, do you have a question? She says, no, I want to talk about great-grandpa. Great-grandpa took care of his brain, took care of his heart, and he lived 22 years beyond when he was told he had 6 months to live. And he got a job that helped him to keep walking because his brain needed that and his heart needed that. And my great-grandpa, when he called me, he would ask me how I was doing, and he'd ask me how I was doing with the things I asked him to pray for. And he would remember that from one call to the next. Well, I'm standing there in tears because I'm no different than anybody. You're doing all you can do just to get through the day. You never dream, because I never sat down with my granddaughter and told her the whole story or anything, but that's what she had constructed out of that. And so when we make this change, we're not making a change just for here. This is 4 generations. Yeah.
There's so many pieces to that story.
That's beautiful.
So what's it like when you grow up with a mom who's had a head injury, who's depressed, who doesn't have a good filter, who, when she does filter things, it's filtered through depression or negativity, and then the transformation? It's just so special for me to be, a small part of that story. When we come back, we're going to actually begin to wrap this up on how does the brain and the mind work together. And if there's something you learn from this podcast, write it. Send it to us, post it on any of your social media channels, and hashtag Brain Warriors Way. Go to brainwarriorswaypodcast.com or Apple Podcasts. Leave a review. We'll enter you into a free drawing for one of Tana's books. You can also leave us questions at brainwarriorswaypodcast.com. Every week we don't have a guest, we'll answer questions.
And please share it. So if you know someone who can use the information, don't forget to share it.
And also you can learn more about Dr. Henslin. One of his best books is Brain on Joy, or you can go to his website at Dr. Henslin, Henslin, drhenslin.com. Stay with us.
If you're enjoying the Brain Warriors Way podcast, please don't forget to subscribe so you'll always know when there's a new episode. And while you're at it, feel free to give us a review or 5-star rating, as that helps others find the podcast.
If you're considering coming to Amen Clinics or trying some of the brain healthy supplements from BrainMD, you can use the code podcast10 to get a 10% discount on a full evaluation at amenclinics.com or a 10% discount on all supplements at brainmdhealth.com. For more information, give us a call at 855-978-1363.